Welcome back. The head is back on the bench. It's all been cleaned up, and the machine shop did a valve job on here, and it's all been pressure tested and checked. So everything's looking really clean and nice. It needed a bit of a touch up. Keep them following along. So upon reassembly here, got into looking at these valve springs. So the manual is saying these need to be 54.6 mil, or that's 2.15 inches for the freestand height, and these are all sitting right around 55 to 56. And then they need to be checked for squareness. So use a feeler gauge in between there to make sure it's not leaning too far. And you're allowed to be 0.06 out. And these guys are all really good. I checked all of them, so I used the 0.03, and that was about as maximum as I was out on any of them. So springs appear to be good. I've got the exhaust rotators here all cleaned up, and then on the intake side, and all these locks, these tapered locks, are all cleaned up and in good condition, so they're ready to go back in. And for you Canadians, if you're not aware, Canadian Tire has a tool lending program. So here's a spring compression tool. I use that to get them out. I'll use them right now to put it back in. Try to get a video of that. So you can borrow this thing for free and then just return it. So I've got the intake valves here, and then the exhaust have two of these indents in here. So the exhaust seals, I got new seals in the package with all of my gaskets for the whole engine kits here. All new gaskets, everything going to be going back in. There's the block covered up, but we'll get into that later. Okay, so step one is to get your seals on the intake. There are these little rubber caps that go over, and then on your exhaust, it's like an O-ring but kind of square on the second notch there. So the first notch is going to be for these retaining tapered clips here. So I got my intake ones on. Now I used a little bit of this assembly lube. So I was able to slide those on. So I've got all that like that. So the exhaust have these little rotating cap dealies, and the intake do not. They're just a piece like that. Okay, so there's the intake spring there, and the way this tool works, you get it all the way loose. You pinch those little teeth over. And then I've been using my drill. Okay, there. So that's got the spring compressed. And now this should slide over the intake, leaving us go in from the bottom with the first little tapered piece. That's nice like that. And then the second one is going to sit right on top. And if you just pull back gentle, that'll seat. And then we just got to release. Off it comes, it's set. Repeat. Okay, I ran into a little problem on the exhaust ones here. On these seals here, so that seal is going to sit right inside here. Now you can see it's kind of a sharp edge, and the clearance is not a lot. So even with a bit of lube, when I'm installing this guy over, and I hit that seal, and I'm pushing it, I'm rolling the seal. It's rolling right off its little seat. So what I did was I compress it ready to go with the seal off, and then I'm able to slide this on with the spring, and it's difficult, but you can put the seal on. And when this comes back, you can see the tapered edge on there. So the seal is going to fit right in there, and there's way less chance of it rolling right off. So I got this one ready to go. So I'm just installing that there. Now this is difficult, but with a bit of a lube, you can kind of get it started on there, roll it through the first one where the tapered clips are going to sit, and get it right back and into place. So hopefully that helps. Okay, so we got all the springs in there. Everything seemed to go in quite nicely, so I'm pretty happy with that. And before I go any further, I was just going to mention the manual. It did say that sometimes the valve seats come oversized from the factory, and if they are, right in here somewhere on the exhaust side, here's the exhaust side, it's going to be stamped in line with the valve that it's concerning, and it says either S010-0S or it says S020-0S, so that's 10 thou or 20 thou bigger, but I'm not seeing that on this head, so I'm not too worried about that. Machine shop went through all this, did a valve job on it, and these valves actually came back installed. I just had to do the springs. So this head was planed before I bought the hoe from the previous owner, and then of course we got the block here. So this has all been bored out. 3 of the thick wall sleeves, I guess they're just under 1/8 of an inch thick. So those are then interference fit, they're impressed in place, and then this thing was decked and then rebored for the stock size pistons. Of course there's new pistons in here. Everything's been cleaned up, and in the hot bath there's the back of the cam journal there. And I ended up just getting a new cam. It was relatively inexpensive considering everything we're doing here. So brand new cam, new pistons, this is all ready to rock. And then I've got the rocker arm assembly here, right back to the machine shop, all wrapped up and pre-lubed. So one thing to see on here, there's a little notch. I don't know if you can see it. There's a little notch right there on the top. That needs to point up. And that's for the oil passages. And then you can see right in here that there's little holes in the tops of these guys. And you can see right through that. These are all clean. They're not gunged up. This thing's been taken apart, cleaned, oiled, reassembled, all in spec. And other than that, the springs are in place and the spacers. So we're going to throw the head onto the block with no head gasket. And then I'm going to finger down all the head bolts in the right order. And then we're going to check to see if those are bottoming out. Because this head has been decked, and so has, the block has been decked, at least cleaned up, and this has too at some point. I just want to make sure that my head bolts aren't bottoming out. So the manual says finger tight those guys down, and then try to slip a feeler gauge in there. And if you can get 10 thou in between the head bolt, the head of the bolt, then you're not at depth. So then I'm going to have to get a 1/2 inch by 13 UNC to a tap, and I'm going to have to thread more into these block threaded holes here. Hopefully that's not the case, but we'll see how that plays out in a second here. Okay, sat her up there real nicely with no head gasket in place. These guys all went in really smooth. These washers won't move. There's no gap there at all. So I went in with a feeler gauge, and I can't get it under there. So I'm content that these are all not bottoming out and we have enough threads. There hasn't been enough material taken off either the head or the block to require more threading. So we're good. You can see on here on the faces of all these rocker arm pads, these had little divots in them before where they were wearing on the backs of the valves. So they cleaned those up at the machine shop. I'm not sure exactly how they get the proper radius on it. I'm sure they got some fancy jig and a grinder. But you can see those are all cleaned up. And all these oil holes are free and clear. This side's good. And then right here is our little notch. So that needs to be pointing up to allow the oil to flow throughout this system. Okay, so next step, I'm kind of waiting on the torque converter. Had to get a new flex plate or drive plate, whatever you call it, so that's on its way. Torque converter's done, so I'll have the guy that's doing the torque converter to put that on dead center. I don't want to get, I guess I can put the cam in there. I'll put the cam in next, that's already lubed up. But I don't want to put any gears on the front side here quite yet, because then the engine will be too hard to turn over. And I'm gonna have to check with my my needle gauge here, make sure that that torque converter is properly centered on the flywheel. Well, it's still somewhat easy to turn. So I'll take this guy off, or I might just leave it on there and cover it up for now, but I'll take this guy back apart and I'll see you in the next one. Any advice? Much appreciated. Thank you. All right, so I got the new tappets or lifters. Let's give them a little blast of air. Make sure they're all clean. Hit them with a lint-free cloth. They're super clean here. And then I'm putting a little blob of this assembly lube here. Giving it a little coat on the face, so that's what's going to be making contact with your cam lobes on your camshaft. And then these are just a bit of a reach. I'll go in here on this one. There it goes, nice and tight. So that's in there. Come around here, Russ. Point the camera in there. There you can see it right there in the, those are the camshaft journals. So we'll get all those in, then we'll slide the cam in.